Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to look at testing a component that has props and needs some user input. If we check out the starting code, we'll see we have this random number component. This should look familiar from lesson 1. In the span, we're displaying this random number. That is our output. And we have this button, which is generating our random number using this method down here. And as you can see, it's using this min and max prop to determine the range within which to generate that random number. These are our inputs. So what about this component should we be testing? Well, by default, if there's no button clicked, the random number data value should be 0. So we're going to test that. And if the button is clicked, the random number should be between 1, our min prop, and 10, our max prop. Additionally, we want to be testing that this component is written in a way that it is definitely receiving the props and using them correctly. So we're going to look at testing different prop values. So our third test is if the button is clicked, random number should be between 200 and 300. Those are the new min and max props that we will add. So now we're ready to write these tests. So let's create a new test file. We'll call it randomnumber.spec.js. And at the top here, I'm just going to paste in a couple lines of code so that we can import the component that we're testing. And then I'm importing mount from ViewTestUtils. We'll start off writing the describe block, which creates our test suite. And then name it according to the component we're testing. Then inside of here, we'll use the justTest method to write out our first test. Again, by default, random number data value should be 0. And just to scaffold this out, I'm going to put expect true to be false. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy this and update this for our second test, where if the button is clicked, random number should be between 1 and 10. And finally, we'll copy this for our third test, where if button is clicked, random number should be between 200 and 300. Of course, true is not false, so all of these tests are going to fail. So let's make sure that they are failing, and then we'll go back and get them to pass. We'll say npm run test unit. First off, we see that one test suite failed and one passed. The one that is passing is the one we wrote in the last lesson, and the one that's failing is the one that we just wrote. Specifically, we see that 3 tests failed. These are the 3 tests that we just wrote, which we expected to fail. Now we're going to get them to pass. So going up to our first test, we need to mount the component that we're testing. So we'll use the ViewTestUtils mount method. That gives us the wrapper, which includes the mounted component. So we'll say wrapper.html to get its HTML. And we're expecting it to contain a span which displays 0, our default value. Great, so now let's run this test. We'll open up the console and then run npm run test unit. And great, we see that 2 tests are failing. And if we look at this output, it looks like we did indeed get that first test to pass. So let's move on to the second test. It also needs to be mounted, so we'll copy this and paste it down here. Since this is testing if the button is clicked, we can use our wrapper to find that button and force a click on it. As a side note here, because I just have one button in this component, I just said the element name button. But if you're testing a component that has multiple buttons, you'd want to target that specific button with a class name or by ID. So now that we've found our button, we can then trigger a click event. So this effectively simulates a click event on this button, which will update our random number value. Now to fetch that value, we'll say const random number, then use our wrapper to find the span, and then say element.textContent to get the value that's in that span. And because we want it to be an integer, we'll wrap it in parseInt. Now we expect that random number to be greater than or equal to 1, our min prop, and then to be less than or equal to 10, our max prop. Now we can go ahead and test that this is working. Great, we only have one remaining test failing, and that's our third one. So let's get that one to work now. It's going to be very similar to the second test, so we'll copy all of this code and paste it down here. And of course, now our min and max prop is 200 and 300, so we'll update these greater than and less than values. And what happens when we run this test? As you can see, it's failing, and why? Well, it says we expected greater than or equal to 200, but we received 8. This is because we haven't done anything to change those prop values. Remember from the last lesson when we looked at setting data? We can do that same thing, but with setting props. So here in the mount method, we can add on here and say props data, and then set our min and max prop to 200 and 300. Now when we run this, we'll see that all tests are passing. Perfect. Great job. I'll see you in the next lesson where we look at more essential aspects of testing Vue components.
So this effectively simulates a simulates. What? I've said it so many times it's lost meaning now.